My name is Laura Garcia, and I am a director of adult medicine and nurse practitioner who treats opioid addiction in Baltimore. During my presentation, you will be seeing photos of friends and colleagues of mine who have been impacted by opioid addiction. They have volunteered to participate in order to help save lives. My dear friend Money shared with me, I used to think my mother's story was so out of the ordinary. She was a wife, a mother, a lifelong worker, and kind to her very soul. After I lost her to an overdose in 2012, in my search to find out why, I learned hers was a common tale. She was a woman caught in the grip of an addiction without access to affordable treatment. 200 Americans die each day from opioid overdose. Ours is a society that has criminalized sickness. Those who have suffered from addiction have faced lack of access to treatment and often strict punishment for their perceived moral failings for many years. These policies are not just cruel and unscientific, they are also woefully ineffective. 2.5 million Americans are addicted to opioids. Death tolls continue to rise, and to date, our flawed response has resulted in the devastation of entire communities. Declaring a war on drugs has only exacerbated our society's already existing marginalizations. Opioids have ravaged communities of color and poor communities, and we have not paid attention. Now, addiction is affecting rich, poor, white, black, young, and old alike, and is escalating at an alarming rate. 65,000 Americans died of opioid overdose in 2016. That is an increase of 50% from 2015. Now, this newer, more pervasive phenomenon is due to many reasons, including unethical pharmaceutical practices, liberal prescribing habits of medical providers, newer, more lethal opioids, and yes, the continued criminalization of addiction. The injustice of our past response cannot be undone. However, it is time we stopped treating addiction like a criminal act and moral failing and started treating it like the public health issue it has always been. Opioid overdose is now the leading cause of death in Americans under 50. Each year we outpace the previous with no end in sight. How did we get here? Why do we consider using drugs a criminal act? The stigma attached to this illness has perpetuated a treatment approach that is not effective. Addiction is not a choice. It is a chronic brain disease that results in long-term changes that cannot be undone. This is not about willpower or morals. Addiction is a disease. Just like type 2 diabetes, addiction causes long-term physiologic changes to the body. Both are lifelong, requiring medication. Both are deeply influenced by external factors that are hard to change. But stigma enforces a criminal justice approach. Would we ever consider jailing a diabetic for their illness? We have treatments that work, as long as people have access to them. So we have to keep people alive long enough to get treatment. 80% of Americans who are experiencing opioid addiction do not have access to treatment. We can learn from how other countries have tackled this problem. The most important benchmark they are meeting is that fewer people are dying. Canada has set up safe injection spaces. Switzerland allows providers to prescribe heroin, and Portugal has decriminalized drug use. 14 years after experimenting with decriminalization of drugs, Portugal's overdose death rate has plummeted to an all-time low. We are starting to embrace these ideas in the US, but not fast enough or widely enough to mitigate this epidemic. The US Congress passed the CARA Act in July of 2016. My home state, Maryland, passed the HOPE Act this year, which both increase funding for access to treatment. Seattle is planning on setting up safe injection spaces. However, this is already under fire, and a ballot initiative has been proposed to ban the spaces. Proponents of the old approach have not yet given up on applying a criminal justice lens to this public health crisis. I ask you to lobby your legislators of both parties to increase funding for treatment, but also to decriminalize drug use, set up safe injection space, and allow carefully prescribed heroin as a comprehensive treatment to this epidemic. Sometimes doing the right thing, following the science, and implementing the best policy is politically perilous. But being a progressive means proceeding without fear. 200 people died yesterday from opioid overdose. One died while I gave this speech. We cannot afford to be afraid of the right solutions.